We're here.
We're here.
We made it.
We're doing it.
Big time is what's happening.
Yeah,
we are
we're
big
going
time.
vintage.
Is that the name of the pod?
That's the name.
We're here.
We're here. Podcast. We're Vintage Church. We're going vintage. Our people are going vintage. We want to get into the vintage truth of the Bible.
Come on.
So we're going for it, bro.
Got a vintage truth.
Yep.
Vintage faith. The thing about vintage is,
Never
come
on,
everybody in the comments, come on.
Never goes out of style.
Oh man, this is gonna be fun.
What I love is when you're on stage and you try to set that up and nobody says anything.
Literally,
and it's just crickets, and you're like, "Gosh,
hey,
one of these days."
Whoever's listening out there, if you want to like hook it up, when I say that in service, just say it never goes out of style. That'd be incredible.
Yes, sir. Dude, it's fun to be here. It's cool that we're doing this.
We're doing it.
I'm excited for it. I think it's going to be a blessing to our people. But why are we doing this? I mean, there's a million podcasts. There's dudes who are way smarter than us, way better looking than us. Like, why are we doing this? Yeah. Are we trying to get 1 million followers? What's the purpose?
Yeah, we wanted to have the dumb, ugly podcast for all the Christians out there that relate to that. No, I mean, this was honestly, I think we'll talk about this in another episode, but this is something you and me talked about kind of even day one of just dreaming about vintage church.
Right.
We realized that as leaders in a church, we want to disciple our people. And the reality is most of our people are online.
Right.
And so I think really this is the era of digital discipleship. And so all we're hoping to accomplish on this podcast isn't, I made a joke, George Janko, we're coming for you. We want to have a podcast bigger than you.
Shout out George.
Just kidding. We went to school together actually, but
we
did go to school together.
You go to GCU?
No, high school.
Oh, really? He's an Arizona guy.
He is an Arizona guy.
I didn't know that.
All right.
Interesting.
So we'll see how this goes because I now started the timer. We're going to try to just bring people in our church. So this is for our church family. We hope it blesses a ton of people. The internet is a crazy thing that's going to reach people in other countries. But really our goal for this podcast is just have another element of being able to disciple our people, bring content to you guys right where you're at on social media, on YouTube, on your favorite podcast platform. And then our goal is just to talk about things we're talking about on Sundays. So I know I talk for a very long time on Sundays, and you're probably thinking Hudson must have just said everything he possibly has to say on this. But the reality is I have so much more that I would love to say about all these messages. And this just gives us another avenue to maybe go down some other things. We just started community groups. So maybe this could be another facilitator of just diving into the messages, going deeper, talking more about application, and we'll kind of see where it goes from here. But this might be awful, and we're going to figure it out. Yeah. But we do just hope it's a blessing to our church and our people.
Totally. Yeah, dude. I think it is going to be a blessing because we're going to be able to pull some things out of the sermon that I think needed to be highlighted on Sunday that you probably didn't get enough time to really go into it. So hopefully it's going to, one, help our people after Sunday to be able to revisit the sermon, revisit what God did on Sunday, what God's calling them to, but then also start pulling out some nuggets that you weren't able to really get into that can just help our theological understanding. And more than anything, like help us have a bigger view of God, see who God is in a deeper sense. And so I think it's going to be huge for our people. I'm excited for it. We're going through the book of Genesis right now. And for anybody who's listening who doesn't know us, we're only 5 months old. This is our second series. We could have done any book in the Bible. Why did we want to start with Genesis?
Yeah, you're thinking about starting a brand new church. There's a whole bunch of books in the Bible, a whole lot of series you could do. For me, and we'll touch more on kind of why we started Vintage Church, I think, in another episode that we do. But I really believe the greatest battle that we're facing right now in our families and our communities, we were at a Deer Valley Unified School District event, like even for the school district, is a war on ideologies. There's so many ideas out there. There are so many people claiming to know what's true, or even claiming you can't know what's true. Right. And I started the whole series. We started with just the idea of the beginning. And in the beginning, you see there is God. And I thought about something I'd heard, a guy named Friedrich Nietzsche. And guys, I can't pronounce English words right. So when we start talking about German names or Greek words or Hebrew words, like I'm making it all up.
Right.
The pronunciation I'm making up.
You just gotta say it like you know what it's supposed to be, and then nobody will question it.
I know, totally. Well, it was interesting because in the 1800s, he's living in Europe. He is in European culture and European education. And he is looking at culture. So he himself is an atheist, but he's
Hmm.
looking at culture and he looks around and he makes the statement, God is dead.
Hmm.
Now, the interesting thing was, as an atheist, he wasn't doing this to try to push his atheistic beliefs onto people. He was simply doing a cultural inventory of what he sees going on. And he actually realized this was a bad thing for society. Because what he realized is if God is dead, that means there is no God. So naturally, it's atheistic. If there is no God, there's no moral authority, there's no objective morality, there's no objective truth, which means there's actually no meaning and no purpose in life. Which, if you follow all that down, you are stuck with a nihilistic worldview. And even people who hold that realize that's not good for society.
Yeah.
That means there's no point of anything, there's no meaning in anything. So you might as well do whatever you think is best. I might as well do whatever I think is best. And who cares who it hurts along the way? So it's interesting to me that that was his commentary in the late 1800s. And then to see where we are today. And really, that is the prevailing worldview, even for Christians. So when
Hmm.
I talked about this, I talked even for our church of, hey, I actually think most of us, this is how we live. And we're going to get into this when we talk about Genesis 2 and Genesis 3, is we actually believe there is no objective morality or truth or whatever. And we actually want self-autonomy in those areas. Even as Christians, I think we struggle with that. So I feel like Genesis was a great series to just start with this idea of there is a God. He created the world. He designed the world. He created humans. He set up humans. He gave them purpose. So let's go see what that is.
Dude, love it. Yeah, I would love to just kind of start unpacking what we've been going through the last 3 weeks with Genesis, last 4 weeks with Genesis 1 to 3.
Yeah.
We had a guest speaker, Mike, come in and he talked about the Imago Dei, about the image of God. So yeah, dude, if we could, what has been in the last 4 weeks, just things that have been sticking out to you, starting with Genesis 1, that you feel like, man, if our people could grasp onto this,
Mm-hmm.
it's really going to shape them. It's going to form them. It's going to help them with their walk with Jesus.
Mm-hmm. So I think especially in Genesis chapter 1, one of the cool creation things is just the fact that we see a few things about the nature of God. So we did just the first 2 verses to start out, and we get in the beginning there is God, which is this like crazy statement. It's not in a galaxy far, far away. It's not once upon a time. It is the true account of the history of our world, which means that God existed before anything. He created everything and he governs everything.
Hmm.
And so it starts out with this foundation of who God is as creator, designer, the authority, the one who sustains it, which kind of sets up everything else. But I mean, even just that statement that God created or God was in the beginning is pretty crazy. And then it says that he created the heavens and the earth. Then in verse 2, you get that it's without form, it's void. There's this darkness over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters, which leads to a whole bunch of questions.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. That I think is one of the things where I'm reading this. I'm like, what the heck is happening here? Because it says that God's creating the heavens and the earth. And then the earth was without form and void. Like,
Mhm.
how can the earth be without form and void? Wouldn't it just be nothing? Like,
Yeah.
that doesn't make sense to me. And then the Spirit of God is hovering over the face of waters.
Mm.
How is there waters there
Mhm.
if he hasn't created it, right? Like, then we go to verse 3 and then we start seeing God actually start creating stuff. What's happening there? Like, for somebody like me, where I read this and I'm like, this makes no sense how the earth could be without form and void. And then at the same time, the Spirit of God is hovering over those waters.
Mhm.
And yet it doesn't seem like God has started creation.
Mhm. So it's such a good question because just on face value, you have to decide a few things. And so in verse 1, it says, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, some people say that that is like a summary statement of then everything that's going to happen. I think actually what we should take it is in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And at that point in time, everything that is going to be created was created. And I think a helpful imagery would be it's like a potter sitting down to form clay, and he's got all the clay in front of him. And so at that moment, he has everything that he's going to use to create the earth. And you got to be careful not to take that too far, but that's basically what's going on. And so there is this unformed creation now before God at the end of, started in verse 1 and at the end of verse 2.
Mhm.
And then in verse 3, God's going to start taking the unformed creation, but still creation, and then begin to form it. And we'll see that kind of as the days lay out. We talked about this some as we were like going to preach it. People will say that there's like a chaos happening here and like kind
Yeah.
of pull maybe too much from it. But I really just think this is the unformed creation that God has now spoken into existence. Then the Spirit of God is cool because we realize that God is not, or God always exists in relationship.
Right.
And so from eternity past, God didn't create us because he was just so alone with all that time and space. And a pastor would say that God's like a girl at a junior high prom where he's just like hoping someone will come talk to him. And so he creates humanity who will like, worship him on Sundays and then disobey him all throughout the week. No, God is perfectly satisfied in a loving relationship, completely fulfilled in the Trinity.
Yeah.
So you have God the Father, you have the Spirit, and then going to John 1, we get that the Son is actually the word through which everything is created. So God exists in Trinity. He has spoken, heavens and earth are created. He precedes everything that exists. He creates everything that exists. He governs everything that exists. And then jumping into week 2, the creation, we start to see, okay, how does God form this unformed creation?
Right. Yeah. How does he do that? So I like that imagery of like, it's the potter's clay. It's not yet formed, but it's there. Everything he needs is there. That's what we're getting in 1 and 2. Then what does he do with that clay? What are we seeing? How are we supposed to read verses 3 to 26? Right? Like
Yeah.
what's a good way to appropriately read the creational order?
I think a helpful, again, we could go into like every single detail of it. We won't, but I think a cool framework that as I was reading and studying it that really came to mind was that God, I think we get that God's a creative God.
Sure.
I mean,
Yeah.
you living in Arizona, you look at
Right.
the sunset, you realize like what God created was spectacular.
Yeah.
I mean, just the vast design, maybe we'll talk about it here, but like all the different species of animals. I talked about
Well, in your sermon,
jellyfish.
yeah,
Yeah,
what was it, like 7,000 jellyfish?
yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah, I have the note somewhere, but went to the aquarium and I was like, jellyfish are cool. And you realize there's like 7,000 species of just
Yeah.
jellyfish. Like,
Yeah.
and I think I said something like, God didn't need to flex like that,
No.
but he did because
Yeah.
he's creative. I think the cool thing though, in studying the text was God was also really deliberate and intentional in his design. And so we jump into creation. So right away we get day 1. And on day 1, we get God creating the light and the dark. And he also then says he has the night and the day. The
Right.
cool thing is there is no sun, moon, stars, or anything yet. So what is the light then? And I think even from Revelation, we realize that God is literally the light. Like he is illuminating creation just because he is light himself. But what's cool with that is we see that God, before he creates anything else, so he's created, everything's there, and now he's going to start organizing it, designing it, making it intentionally formed. He creates time. So God exists outside of time. We exist inside of time. And in day 1 of creation, we actually see God create time itself, which you can't even fathom that.
Yeah.
But that's what he does. So he starts by creating time. We now have day and night. Day 2 comes and it says we get the sky and we get the waters, which is really, it says that Earth at this point in time is just this giant ball of waters that the Spirit is hovering over.
Right.
Again, we don't want to read too much into it, but that's kind of what's going on. It's a helpful way to think about it. Then it says there's this great expanse that God creates. And in creating this expanse, the literal language being used here is like a sheet of metal, and God's like hammering it and it's expanding. And so God takes this ball of water, whatever it is, that's unshaped and unformed, and he like separates it out. So now you have the waters above and the waters below, which for us would be the sky and the waters.
Right.
But really what God just did was he created a spatial realm. So he creates time in day 1, and now he creates space. Like
Right.
he literally creates, and not space like outer space, like
Yeah.
the spatial realm that we live in.
Right.
And so God, one by one, is creating. I mean, he could just snap his fingers and all would have been done, but he chooses to operate in a process that's ordered, that's intentional, which I just think speaks to God being a God of order, a God of design, a God of intentionality. So now that we get the waters above and the waters below, now it's time to do some stuff with that. So in day 3, we get God creating the land and we get God creating the seas. And so now he's doing something with the waters below, basically. So the waters above are there, it's the sky. Now he's dealing with the waters below, the land and the sea. And then on day 3, we get a double creation. So he creates the land and the seas, and then he also creates vegetation to start sprouting up on that. I forgot to mention this too. The other intentional thing we see God doing in creation is, so the 6 days of creation run as parallel designs. And so day 1 coordinates to day 4, day 2 coordinates to day 5, and day 3 coordinates to day 6. And so Now we jump into day 4. And so God in day 1 creates the
Real,
light and the
real
darkness.
quick.
Yeah.
These first 3 days, from the way that you're describing it, it kind of sounds like God's creating the environment for things to actually live inside,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we have the waters above, the waters below. We have the land, we have vegetation, which is like kind of interesting that that's like a added creation.
Mm-hmm.
We have this, we have time, um, which we probably would think more like outer space, if that's probably a good way of thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
What that looks like would be kind of, I don't think we can really imagine what that looks like, but it feels like those first 3 days are kind of uh these realms that God has created.
Mm-hmm.
You think that would be a fair assessment of that?
I think so. Yeah. Especially when we now look at the parallels of it. And so in day 1, God creates the light and the darkness, the day and night.
Right.
And then in day 4, he creates the luminaries that are going to go into those spaces.
Yeah.
And so he creates the sun to govern the day and the moon and the stars to govern the night. And we obviously know more than the original audience would have, but we know that, the stars and the moons make up planets that make up galaxies, and
Right.
we exist within that. And so God's creating all of that.
Mm.
The interesting thing here is, and this was something I wanted to bring out on the podcast because we mentioned it a few times. So Moses is the author of Genesis. So
Right.
Genesis isn't actually written like by Adam and Eve. Genesis is actually written by Moses. They're in the desert. They've escaped from Egypt. The Israelites are following him. Like the 10 Commandments have happened. The golden calf has happened. That his generation has basically been told, hey, you're all going to die in the desert. This new generation is going to actually go into the promised land. Like that's where we're actually at as this is written. So it's written for that audience. So at the same time Moses is writing this creation account, there are other creation accounts in other places in the ancient Near East. So other people groups and cultures had their own creation accounts. Now, most of these other cultures, the big difference was they worshiped many gods. So they had a pantheon of gods that they would worship. And for them, the sun, the moon, the stars, the planets, the galaxies, again, they wouldn't have had all the knowledge we have of those things, but those were the gods.
Yeah.
And so now you have a creation story where there's actually a God outside of all those things. That's the very one who created that.
Mm.
And so we don't actually read it as the flex that it is, but this is kind of Moses being like, hey, our God actually is one who created the things that you're worshiping, thinking that they're gods.
The things that are in the sky that are shining, those actually aren't gods.
Exactly.
Our God is the one who created these things.
Mm-hmm.
And what's cool about it is like the things that he created in that realm, they are the things that forever, like we use for navigation,
Mm-hmm.
right? They use it on the seas, they use the stars. The sun is the thing that allows us to know how long a year is. Like he starts to fill that realm of time with the things that helps us navigate, helps us understand what time is.
Yeah.
And so it is a cool flex that it's like God is setting these luminaries. I like that word.
Mm-hmm.
Setting them up as a creation, not as a creator, where they would have believed like these things are the reasons why creation actually happened.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And so it's cool that that's kind of a flex on those ancient Near Eastern. And some people might get caught up with, you're telling me there's other creation accounts? Well, of course,
Right.
But the cool details are in the details of where the creation account that we get in the Bible differs from those other ancient Near Eastern accounts, because you really do see that there are some similarities, no different than we have literary styles that exist in 2026 that are different than 400 years ago. But those differences are really important, and we've brought up a few of those through the series, and I'll mention some of them now. But so then we get to day 5, and we get the sky creatures and the water creatures. So, like you said, God created the domain of the sky. He created the domain of the seas, and now he's filling those things. Again, not just with one kind of bird, but with like all of the variety of birds we have, not just with one type of fish, but with all the different sea creatures we get. One of the words in the Hebrew is actually like sea monster. Like the word is monster, which is kind of fun. So I don't know if you believe it, like the Loch Ness monster, or something like that.
Or like the Leviathan.
Yes.
These pictures you get in the Bible.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I don't know what's at the bottom of Lake Michigan, but maybe it's there. And then the cool thing at this point in time is we actually get the first. So we have the first created like living beings now. We get the birds and we get the fish.
Yeah.
And God actually blesses them. So this is the first time now God isn't speaking and creating. Now God is actually speaking to creation. And he speaks a blessing to the sky creatures and the water creatures. And this blessing includes a kind of a threefold thing. One is fruitfulness. So it's the capacity to reproduce. These things can reproduce themselves. Multiplication, this idea that they will have a numerical abundance. And then the last thing is filling their domain. So their goal, God tells them, hey, be fruitful and multiply. Reproduce yourself. Fill the area that I give you. And I think we need to remember that God is a God of abundance. Like he's not a God of scarcity. He's not worried that he's going to overpopulate something. Like he tells them, go fill it, be fruitful, multiply. And that was a blessing actually to them, which leads to day 6. And so if we're looking at the parallels, you got day 1 and day 4. So God creates the night and the day, and then he creates the things to govern those. And then he creates the sky and the waters. He creates the birds and the fish. And then on day 3, there's a double creation where he also creates the vegetation. So now on day 6, we're going to get a 2-part creation. So we're going to get the land animals, and then we're going to get mankind being created. So day 6, so day 3, you get the seas and the land. Now you're going to get the land animals that are going to fill the land. You know, a few fun things for you. So 2,000 species of jellyfish, 7,000 species of frogs, over 10,000 species of birds that have unique songs and feathers and migration patterns and instincts. For all my GCU fans, over 90 species of antelopes. Fun fact, right?
Yeah, I thought there was just one antelope.
Yeah. Well, there's just thunder for those who catch what that is. You know, a few verses I didn't read that I think would just be cool to kind of point out just the awesomeness of God in creation. One of it's Psalm 33, 6-9. And hopefully this just kind of stokes your worship for God and his creation. So Psalm 33, 6-9 says, by the word of the Lord the heavens were made, and by the breath of his mouth all their host. He gathers the waters of the sea as a heap. He puts down the deeps in storehouses. Let all the earth fear the Lord. Let all the inhabitants of the world stand in awe of him. For he spoke and it came to be. He commanded and it stood firm. So God really did create through his word. And I like this one. We went through the book of Colossians. And in Colossians 1, talks about how Jesus is the word through whom God created all things. And there's nothing outside his scope of creation. I love this. He says, he's the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions, rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. So there's nothing outside of his scope of creation. And here on day 6, we just see that the creativity of God, the abundance of God, and just creating this insane amount of animals and species to fill this land that he has given them. And he blesses the animals in the same way, to be fruitful and to multiply.
Yeah. You mentioned something that I think is worth going back to if we can. But you mentioned about like the creation stories and that there's different creation stories happening at that time. And you mentioned the fact that the author of this is Moses. And so when we're thinking about Moses and where Moses is at when he's writing this is just after they're delivered from Egypt. And so they have been living in Egypt for 400 years, inundated with their ideologies, their religion, their creation story. And so Moses is kind of given this like rebuttal to what they have been told for 400 years. What are some of the things within that narrative that they would have been just inundated with within the Egyptian culture that this story, the true story of creation, is actually like just coming after them, confronting them, and highlighting the falsehood that they have been inundated with for so long?
You thinking like image of God on this one?
I'm thinking whatever you want to say.
Well, I do think, as we continue on day 6, so God creates the land animals, and it's literally just all the beasts and mammals and all the things. You could just translate it, all the cows, whatever. And then we get the double creation. So on day 6, we also get the creation of mankind. And this is the Imago Dei. This is the image of God. And I think this is another really interesting one because we have the Bible telling us that God creates man and woman in his own image.
Mm.
And this idea of being in the image of God would have only been held for the king or the pharaoh. So it would have been believed that the king or the pharaoh was in the image of God, but the regular people definitely weren't.
Right.
And there was a sense that there was this connection to deity that the kings had.
Mm.
So one of the really interesting things is that when Moses is writing this and using the image of God, he does have this in mind. But the reality is not just the king who's in the image of God, it's actually any human being. So everyone's created in the image of God. And God creates mankind actually to be his authority and ruler on earth. He blesses man and woman to be fruitful and to multiply. But he goes a step further. He tells them to subdue and have dominion. This is ruling like language. This is king like language, that they're supposed to be the ones to actually have subjugation of the earth and the other created things, which was unique for being made in the image of God. The other thing where other ancient Near Eastern creation stories, they believe that there were bigger gods and there were lower gods. And the lower gods were the ones who did all the agricultural work. Well, one day the lower gods are sick and tired of doing all the agricultural work. So they go storm the gates of the big G gods and they go tell them, hey, we're sick of doing all of your work. We don't want to be farmers anymore and do hard work. Let's create humans so that humans can actually serve us. And so humans in other ancient Near Eastern stories are actually created to be like slaves to the gods, which is why they worship things like the sun and the moon and the rain, because they believe they can please the gods will help them with their agricultural work, will provide for them.
Yeah.
So here, humans being made in the image of the God and created in a perfect world in this garden where actually the man's going to work, but it's not going to be hard work. It's not going to be laborsome work. It's actually going to be joyful and worshipful work. Would stand in the contrast of what maybe they were learning in Egypt with these other ancient Near Eastern accounts as well. I think a few other just interesting things about the image of God here. This is why Christians have the some of the ethics that we have. This is why we believe that murder is wrong. This is why I believe in the sanctity of life. And this is why we care for every human life inside and outside of the womb, because we believe that every single person is made in the image of God, therefore has intrinsic dignity, value, and worth. Another interesting thing when we think about other ancient Near Eastern accounts is they did not care about women.
Right.
I mean, people think Christianity are a bunch of misogynists and hate women. The God of the Bible is the most pro-woman thing in the ancient Near East in historic times. I mean,
Right.
God over and over again is giving dignity to women where no one else really cared to.
Yeah.
We don't understand some of the context, so we get it wrong. But here, no other ancient Near Eastern account cares to give you a creation account of the woman, which we get in more detail into. The other thing is saying that both man and woman are made in the image of God means that man and woman are equal in dignity, value, and worth, which again would have been like a big deal at that point in time. We understand that today, which is again why Christians actually very much care for women and treating them right. So it's just a misnomer that Christians wouldn't.
Totally. And then even off that point, we were talking to Mike Thigpen yesterday, and he highlighted, which hopefully, well, this is coming after your sermon this Sunday. So, but he highlighted about the because when God starts to curse Adam, Eve, and the serpent. And he says to the serpent and to Adam, because you have done this. And so he's putting like the blame on them. But there's not a because to Eve, even though she took the fruit and ate it. And we actually see that God dignifies Eve right after the fall of humanity and says that salvation is actually going to come through you, Eve, not through Adam, but through Eve, salvation is going to come. So that has to be like the wildest thing to hear. Not only is God dignifying women, like giving their creation account of women, saying they're made in the image of God as well, but then also you see that the woman, the mother of all life, right, is the one who gets dignified after they just rebel against God. Like that's crazy to me. And then ultimately we know like it's through Jesus, right? It's through Mary. It's not through Joseph, right? Joseph, brother, you get to have kids, but not the first one. And so he gets it's through Mary's conception that Jesus is born, the Savior is born, and
Mhm.
that's coming from the lineage of Eve. And so the blessing does flow through Eve,
Yeah.
which is just going back to your statement of like just how crazy this would have been for them to hear that.
Mhm. Totally. I'll just point at the verse. So in Genesis 3:20, you're right. Dr. Thickwit pointed this out to us yesterday. Right after the woman takes and eats the fruit and all the curses come down, in Genesis 3:20, the Eve then gets named. The man called his wife's name Eve because she was the mother of all living. And that's true both biologically, but then through eventually her lineage to Mary, to Jesus. Um, Literally all the living spiritually as well will come through
Right.
Jesus. And so it
Yeah.
is really cool that he does that
Yeah.
there. Um,
There was also something that you brought up
yeah.
that I think is really interesting and probably worth noting. But these are people who just came out of slavery, who
Mm-hmm.
are hearing this account, right? So
Mm-hmm.
when we think of the image of God, and you mentioned the language of dominion is that rulership
Mm-hmm.
language. Like, if you just put yourself in the position of somebody who was formerly a slave, that we don't know exactly how long out of slavery he's writing this,
Mm-hmm.
but even if it's 30 years later, like that's still in your memory that they're being told, like
Mm-hmm.
they're given language of, they're given kingly language
Mm-hmm.
as a former slave. That has to be like, I wonder if you're in their spot, like, what are
Mm-hmm.
they thinking?
Yeah.
The dignity that they've been given through the word of God, that not only like are they um, rescued out of captivity, but they have an intrinsic value to God
Mm-hmm.
because of how he made them. And it's this ruling like
Mm-hmm.
language that they're given.
Yeah.
I think it's
100%.
cool.
I think it's really cool. And maybe we just end here and we can, we'll talk about Genesis 4 and some other things. Might be a good time to talk about sin there. Because I think there's a few more things to say about the image of God that's worth to maybe just hone in on. One, this is also why God forbids them to make images. And
Why?
so,
Yeah.
because God already created, so people would create images of gods to then worship. And
Right.
God tells them in the Ten Commandments, hey, don't make any carved images, don't worship any image. They obviously right away disobey and create a golden calf because they wanted something physical to worship.
Hmm.
And God's saying, hey, you don't need to create an image of me because I already did, and you are it. Which
That's
is
cool,
pretty
dude.
cool, right?
That's so cool.
And then I think when we think about the idea of, okay, so what does it mean then to have this ruling like language, this kingship like language? And maybe we bring it in Genesis 2 real quick. So, Genesis 2, we don't get a different creation account, but we get to zoom in on day 6.
Hmm.
And what we see is God has now placed the man in the garden and he gives him this creational mandate, you can call it. And that is the subdue and have dominion. And then he tells him in the garden to work and to tend it or work and keep it. And the garden is this place where man meets with God and man enjoys God's presence fully, which is definitely temple like, tabernacle like language. They're going to be with God. God's going to be with them. God's presence is there. Those two words to keep, to tend, to keep and watch, those two words there are the same words given to the priests for what they're supposed to do with their temple work.
Interesting.
And so we see that Adam is really the first kind of image of a priest. And what is the priest? The priest is the worship leader. Now
Right.
it looks different in the garden because sin hasn't entered in yet. But really, he is the one like bringing all of creation to understand who the creator is and give um, worship to the creator.
Hmm.
So you look at the garden. The garden's awesome. There's all these incredible things, all these trees that bear different kinds of fruit, and Adam has everything you could ever need. It's beautiful. There's these animals. Like you just get this idea that it's paradise. But Adam was never supposed to worship paradise. He was supposed to see the paradise, see the creation, and worship God. And so part of the being made in God's image is to be God's royal priesthood on earth, and to rule over the land, to work the land, to cultivate the land. And I think one of the implications of that is human beings are made to work. It was a good thing. And so we're commanded to work before sin ever enters the picture. So work is a good thing. Laziness is a bad thing. And work wasn't meant to be toilsome. It will be because of sin. But I think the other piece of that is as human beings, our creational blessing is actually to build things
Mm,
and to grow things and
mm,
to create things. And so to have families and to have families reproduce into communities and have communities reproduce into towns and have towns reproduce into cities and to have things like agriculture and businesses and to have infrastructure, like all that is wrapped up in that idea of being made in the image of God. And so even think about Israel getting ready to go into the promised land now out of slavery into freedom, like that was their creational blessing, was to fill, subdue the earth, and have dominion over it, which continues to be part of what we're supposed to do today, as Christians, as people made in the image of God.
right. Yeah, dude, that's amazing. Makes me want to go build a house or something. I don't know. Go have some more
It does not
kids.
make me want to go build a house.
But one thing that I don't want us to skip over, because it's easy, and I feel like we always do this, but we kind of see the creation order as 6 days, and we forget that it's 7 days,
Mhm.
right? Um, Speak on that seventh day. Like, what's important? We know God rests in that, but like, what's the significance of that? Why is it included? How should we think about that seventh day?
Mhm. Yeah, man, a lot has been spilt on the seventh day and the idea of Sabbath. I'd say a few things that we know for sure is that one, seven is this idea of completeness.
Hmm,
Because there's also all these things going on with the Hebrew words. And, the first verse is 7 words in Hebrew. And then there's another one that's like 7 times 7. And then it's like 3 times 7. And it's like all these patterns of seven in the creation account. Getting to the seventh day, then, which has all these layers of seven in it as well, and seven being this idea of complete. So when God was done working, when God was done creating, it wasn't like God had forgotten something or there was more work to do. Like what he created was complete and it was good. And you see on the seventh day too, there's no morning and night. So there's almost this idea that God's rest
interesting.
is like this extended thing. It's not just this like 1 day event, though I think it should still be seen that way. And so God's rest is actually intended to be enjoyed through all creation.
Hmm,
Now sin's going to mess that up. But even then, when you get to some of the Psalms, I believe it's Psalm 95, then you get to Hebrews, it talks about how God's rest was destroyed in the fall. Now you get all the Sabbath laws, and there's a lot to be said about that. But I think what's more interesting is in the Psalms, it talks about, and then in Hebrews, it talks about how when they entered the promised land, that was going to be a symbol of God's rest for them. However, they get to the promised land, and that clearly wasn't it. And the author of Hebrews says, because there was a Sabbath rest that was still to come, which we now know came through the person and work of Jesus. And when we think about actually entering God's rest being that moment when we go to paradise someday, when we have this kind of garden coming back in the new Jerusalems and heaven and earth colliding into the new heavens and the new earth, that's actually when God's Sabbath rest will be once again fully realized. And I think now that that rest that was created on day 7, that was supposed to be enjoyed in the garden, that gets marred in day 3, or marred in Genesis 3 with sin, is actually what we continue like anticipating and longing for,
hmm,
as well. Yeah,
yeah.
so much more could probably be said about that. But let's do this. My goal was to keep these somewhat short so people could listen to on a commute or something like that.
Right.
We knew we were gonna probably fail at this, but let me throw a question to you now. I think the one thing at the end of Genesis 2 that's just worth taking into account is God establishes his design for gender, marriage, and the biblical sexual ethic. So now that we're getting into the deep stuff, Mark, what stood out to you though? We talked about it a couple weeks ago in the sermon. What was something that maybe stood out to you in it? And then I'll give a comment and then we can close this down.
Yeah, I love that you asked me the most controversial
I was gonna
question.
have you preach Genesis 3. I messed up on that. Let you preach about sin every time.
Yeah, right. No, yeah, thanks for setting me up with the most controversial one. So when everybody watches this and they point the finger at the person who is uh the most offensive, it's gonna be me
Yeah,
every
let's see
time.
how fast
So
this
I love
YouTube
that.
channel can
Yeah.
get canceled.
um the thing that stood out to me is that God's creational order is the best thing.
Hmm.
Like it
Yeah.
really is. And I'm gonna plug my wife because I have an awesome wife. And I think that she views her role very serious.
Hmm.
And to her, I don't think that she because it's never about the man, right? Like nobody has the issue with the man's role. It
Mm,
always seems to be an issue with the woman's role. And I think that my wife views her role in our marriage as something very sacred and beautiful. And she delights in it
mm,
because she is the caretaker of our home. Like she's raising our kids and I'm helping. I mess it up. She does a good job. But um, when you align yourself in God's creational order, it's a beautiful thing because there's never this idea of dominance where I feel like what our culture tends to do is it actually is trying to highlight dominance
mm,
where it's either the man is trying to dominate his wife and we've seen men use scripture in an offensive way.
mhm,
I believe an offensive way to God to dominate their wife and to try to subjugate their wife.
mhm,
But what's interesting now is in our culture, not to try to get too culture-y, but like it's almost the inverse,
mhm,
where it's like the wife needs to dominate the husband, where it's like, I need to be the leader, I need to have the authority. And by doing so, you're actually not submitting to one another. And like we see in Ephesians, actually to submit to
mm,
one another,
mhm,
right? And it's like the wife wants to, in our culture, to dominate her husband. And you're just going to end up in conflict and heartache because that's not how God designed it. And when we live into God's creational design, things flow easier.
mm,
And so when I know my responsibility is to provide for my family, when I know my responsibility is to give my life up in these tiny sacrificial ways
mhm,
to think, what is the best for my wife? What is the best for my kids? And my motivation is that it's of love for them. It makes it easy for my wife to go, yeah, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to trust your decision because I know your decision isn't ultimately for yourself,
mhm,
that it's for the sake of others. And then when my wife comes in and she trusts me, she supports me. She's the wind in my sails. I think you gave that illustration,
mhm,
right? Like, dude, it just lifts me up
mhm,
where I feel like I can do these things. I have enough self-doubt, you know? Like I don't need my wife to add on to that. I need her to support me in it. And so I think that with that, um, there's a lot we could say about like the attack on marriage from our culture standpoint. We could go all the way back to the 1950s when or the 1960s when they started like the no fault divorce. There's been an attack on it. But when we live into that creational order, God's creational design for marriage, dude, you just start to see the blessings of
mm,
God in it. And it just makes sense. It makes things easier. And so I think that that was a thing that just stood out to me is just I feel like our culture wants to dominate one
mm,
another, whether it's the husband trying to dominate the wife or vice versa, where when you look at God's design, it's actually a mutual um, submission to one another. It's it's being on a team who wants to care for the other more than you want to care for yourself.
mhm,
And it's convicting
mhm,
because you just see your selfishness all the time. I see my selfishness all the time that
totally.
like I care for myself more than I care for anybody else.
Mhm,
But to align myself with that and to know ultimately where I'm going to find peace, purpose is in my service to my family, to my wife. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's the thing that stood out to me in this.
yeah, well, to pull it back to Genesis 2 is God looks at Adam and he declares it's not good, which he keeps saying it's good, it's good, it's good. But this is
Mm,
a zoom in on day 6. So at the end of day 6, God will say, very good. But right now, it's not there yet. And he looks at man being alone and said, not good. The reason he says it's not good is because he gave Adam a blessing, which was to be fruitful and multiply. Well, science lesson, Adam could not do that on his own. And so God brings all the animals in front of him. None of the animals are going to do it for him. The
right.
giraffe is too tall, the lion too frisky, the hyena just full of himself, jokes people. But God then creates the woman, and he creates the woman as the Azar
Mm,
Kenegdu. And Azar is a word for helper. And when we think about the idea of Eve being the helper, people will use it to say that, oh, Adam's in charge and she's just supposed to like help him. But really, the idea was that Adam couldn't fulfill what God had given him to do without her. So she came along to be the one to help him fulfill the image of God, creational blessing that God had given them as humanity. And then at the same time, we see is um, this word kenegdo is opposite but like, or
Hmm.
like fit for him. So it was the right person to match him. And I love that because how we kind of ended it, one would be, and you touched on this, and Ephesians 5 touches on this. We did a whole sermon on it. You can go listen to it. But man and woman are equal in dignity, value, and worth. And both are needed, by the way.
Right.
However, they're distinct in their God-given roles, complementary in their roles, which is kind of
Right.
what you were talking about. And it's a good thing because God designed it good. And we ended the message, and we'll end here. Here in the end of Genesis 2, God establishes gender as one male, one female, or sorry, gender as being male or female, and biological sex is what determines that. He sets that up for us. He also determines what marriage is. Marriage is between one man and one woman in a covenant before God. And his sexual ethic is that sex would only be enjoyed inside of a one man and one woman covenant marriage. And I was talking to a guy on the way here. He's preaching Genesis 2 tonight to a bunch of ASU students. And we were just talking through it. And we want to rebel against that because
Hmm.
we don't want God to tell us what we do with our bodies or how we have sex. Like we want to be able to decide that for ourselves. And I just thought, what's so interesting is that this is a good and a loving design by God. God doesn't do it because he wants to spite us or make it miserable. This is the garden. This is paradise. It's all good.
Totally.
And we just look at the world. What happens when you actually enjoy sex instead of a one man, one woman covenant? Hey, we are together. Divorce isn't an option relationship. You end up with people having the best sex lives in middle age, being committed to each other.
Yeah.
People who just have sex whenever they want with whoever they want end up, and I made this joke to the guy on the phone, as Magic Johnson. Shout out to Magic Johnson. But you literally end up with diseases. Like you end up ruining your life. You end up
Apparently, he
pregnant.
didn't have a disease because that dude is going to live forever.
Yeah. So anyway, but the whole point is when we actually are honest and we look at God's design for the world,
Right.
we realize it is good, it is loving, and you flourish when you obey God's design
Yeah.
and you submit to his design. And so I think that's really what Genesis 2 is calling us to is, hey, and this is even how we titled it. When you look at the life in Eden, this was God's good design for what life could be. And it's a contrast to our life. But it's
Right.
actually in that contrast that we actually see what we should be walking into to have the abundant life God decided for us. And then Genesis 3 is going to mess it up. But
Totally. And yeah, I think that we've all experienced living in rebellion to God and his design. And nobody comes out of that feeling better.
mhm,
It doesn't matter what you're doing, but when you're living in contrast to God's design, it creates suffering, it creates pain, it creates heartache. And I mean, we know each other's story enough to where we can look at each other's story and be like, yeah, dude, I get why when you were living in rebellion to God, you were feeling the way that you're feeling, or you were going through the things that you were going through. These ASU students, like they think, and this is the thing about sin that is so deceptive. Like it's promising you life. We'll see that in chapter 3. Like there's this promise of life. There's this promise of like you're gonna receive the blessings, you're gonna receive the goodness,
mhm,
and you're gonna get to do that outside of authority.
mm,
And so like this is amazing. Go do that. And these students at ASU, like you're going to experience that. You think that like you can just go hook up with whoever you want. And I promise you, I guarantee this, you're going to wake up the next day, you're going to feel guilty and
mhm,
dirty. And you're going to be like, why do I feel this way?
right.
It's because we naturally just want to go against God's design.
Yeah.
And when you do that, it causes suffering. It does not cause blessing.
Mhm,
And so, yeah, I think that this is good news for us to to remind ourselves that God isn't a God of just rules. He's a God of life and
mhm,
abundance. And when we live in accordance to his design, you're actually going to experience the most blessings and abundance and prosperity that you can,
mhm,
because that's what he intended it to be in
mhm.
Genesis 1 and 2.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Um, thank you guys for being involved in our very first
We're done.
podcast.
We're done.
We
I can stop sweating.
that was around 30 minutes, probably a little more. Thank you for taking us on your drive, on your hike, on your fitness journey in the gym. And we'll be back here at some point in time, Lord willing, to keep diving into Genesis with you all. And we'll see you at church on Sunday.
See you Sunday.